Again, thank you for joining us today for our webinar, It's a Hybrid Life Now, Building a Better and Secure WAN for Your Vulnerable Anywhere Workforce. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. First of all, we do respect your time. We want to make sure that you have enough time to get to your next meeting, so we will not run more than 55 minutes today. Questions are encouraged during today's webinar. If you have a question at any point, feel free to use the questions link in the bottom of your screen. We will answer all your questions. However, if we can't answer them all during our Q&A session, we'll follow up with you directly. This is an interactive webinar, and you'll be able to participate in live polling questions. When a polling question comes up, simply click your answers on the screen. Lastly, we are recording today's session, and we'll be sending a link to all registrants within the next few days. And now let me introduce you to Robert Guidry. Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Just quick introduction. I'm Robert Guidry. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here over at Global Data Systems. I've been here for about 22 years or so. Had over 30 years in the IT industry, going back to my Air Force days, and then working in the commercial sector for these, about 25 years or so. Today, I'm responsible for essentially the design, delivery, and installation of the GDS products and services, specifically some of the security topics that we're going to discuss today. I'd like to also introduce my co-presenter here, Tracey Webb. Tracey, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Good morning. My name's Tracey Webb. I'm the Director of Information and Cybersecurity Operations at Global Data Systems. I've been doing communications in one form or another and security since 1996 when I joined the Navy, and currently I'm a part of the team that helps of thought leaders at GDS that helps secure ourselves and bring quality security, cybersecurity products to market for our clients and customers.
Thank you, Tracey. So kind of kicking off today, I want to give a kind of brief overview of what we're going to discuss today. So some of the things we want to talk about is, the education of our users. We certainly got to talk about some solutions today, but we also want to talk about, the education of our end users and use that as one of our lines of defense. Then we're going to go through some solutions today. We're going to take a look at some trends, what has been changing in the industry probably over the last 12 to 18 months. We've seen people move from corporate locations into a much more mobile workforce and work from home. And then we're going to also kind of go through somewhat the anatomy of a breach. What are some of the things that you would need to address? And then, of course, we're going to close out with some Q&A. So when we kind of start off, we want to, just start off with a polling question right here. It's, have you seen any security incidents in your organization that actually have you concerned? So it should be a poll up right there. And while that's being run, I guess, Tracey, I'm going to ask you a question. So in your experience, why are organizations focusing on cybersecurity today? What's driving that behavior?
Well, Robert, I think it's a couple different things, honestly. Even before COVID and kind of the migration of en masse of mobile workers, we had a very large uptick in ransomware and breaches, basically across the world, especially in the United States. So I think that, the C-suite, the executives, and thought leaders within companies are seeing that and understanding that, cybersecurity and hardening of their business is no longer an option. It's really a matter of survival and being profitable.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So some quick results right here. So, well, I guess on the good news, we're not seeing events every day, so that's a good thing. We do see some events coming in. That's 88% of the respondent says, yes, we do see some events. And 13% say no, that they have not seen any of those events at all. So anyway, those are kind of quick results right there on our first poll. So as we move forward, one of the things that we kind of want to talk about is some trends in the industry. So Tracey, there's a couple of things that are going on right now as far as cybersecurity, some of the cyber insurance claims and some trends like that. So can you kind of give us a brief rundown of what type of trends are occurring in the industry when it comes to cyber claims?
Well, really what I'm seeing industry-wide is you see a very large majority of the claims seen by cyber insurance companies, I should say, are usually dealing with malware and malware-related breaches and ransomware. And that's because obviously you need to engage with your insurance company and sometimes legal teams and breach coaches in order to solve that problem of having a ransomware attack. Some of the other ones that are probably equally as there's some trends out there in the industry that show that other things like business email compromise and social engineering using dark web data can be almost as equally as devastating to companies, but sometimes they seem to be a little less apt to display that or talk about it because sometimes there's really not any money involved with that. There's no request of Bitcoin or some kind of transaction. Their data has just been stolen and sold on the street. So ideally, in either case, I think companies should make sure that they engage with the federal law enforcement and handle some of these things and talk about it a little more openly. Because as we've seen just recently with the Centennial Pipeline issue, there is an ability if you get to the FBI in under 24 hours that it's possible that you could get back some, if not all, of your ransomware that you paid out.
Okay, that's interesting. So we can take a look at protecting ourselves, take a look at the trends that's going out there, report those, but we also have the ability to not only recover from those attacks, but we also have the possibility of recouping some of the monies that were spent to maybe pay for a ransomware. So that's pretty interesting. So when we take a look at organizations, we kind of talked about why people are focusing on security and stuff, but let's expand on that a little bit. What's driving those cybersecurity investments? What's keeping these CEOs and CIOs and CISOs up at night? What's driving their behavior?
Well, I mean, kind of going back to the previous question, I think there's obviously been a tremendous uptick in, bad actor activities with some of the largest companies in the world. And what I'm seeing as well is there's starting to be a culture of cybersecurity driven within companies from the executive level, down to the technicians and engineers and all across the company ecosystem, which is a must, right? Because people begin to start taking things a lot more seriously when they have buy-in and communications from their executives of how important to have a general attitude of cybersecurity and awareness baked into your culture really helps a company be more hardened and be more protected and ready to recover from these kind of events.
Yeah. Look, I really like the use of your word culture. I've heard you mention it a couple of times. So to me, culture means there's some training, there's some education out there. We've built it into our day-to-day processes, and people
Right.
follow those activities whether Big Brother is watching them or not. So I think that culture really drives behavior. So I really like that. So, kind of taking a look at that, let's take a look at, our poll question number 2, right? How confident are you that your employees can actually detect an attack? And I guess while that's being run there, Tracey, quick question for you. What do you feel the percentage of attacks that actually go undetected? We talked about underreported, but let's talk about something that goes undetected.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Some of the recent polls that I've reviewed and talked to other colleagues about it, right now the average is running about 60 to 65% of those that go undetected. And normally, to take it a step further, what you'll see is that even when they are detected, sometimes it could be up to 200 plus days before the detection of that malware or bad actor or breach is found in your environment, in your ecosystem.
Well, that's pretty interesting. So we've got over 200 days from the time of an initial breach to some awareness is created. So that's a
Right.
pretty long time for reconnaissance and additional discovery to occur in the environment. So that's pretty interesting. So our
Absolutely.
poll questions coming back, how confident? So we got 43% confidence rating that they're somewhat confident that the users can detect an attack. About 57% that says they're not confident at all. So let's kind of dig into that one just a little bit more. So one of the things we want to talk about, and just kind of going back to some statistics right here, about 96% of Americans see employee negligence as a contributor to data breaches. So that's a pretty high number, and I think a lot of that is influenced by the media and so forth. They're looking for someone to blame a particular breach. You mentioned a pipeline incident here a few weeks ago. So there's a continuing trend. I think the media certainly has some play in influencing that. But what can we do about it? We talked about that culture earlier. So when you take a look at it from a user or end user perspective, what can we do to help improve the culture of security within an organization? You have some thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you had said earlier, when we talk about training and educating our staff and users. First and foremost, you have to create a culture of learning about cybersecurity. You have to provide the necessary training and constant awareness that our staff, our users, and our companies are a part of a team that is a layered approach from a human standpoint to protecting the company and being aware of all the possible ways that a bad actor can utilize or gather data or infiltrate a company infrastructure. Um, One of the main ways that you can do that is when we talk about email, phishing campaigns and things like that that occur that affect companies quite a bit. I mean, it's one of the main attack vectors. So it's important, like, especially in those kind of areas, that we train and we make our users and our staff and employees very aware of the types of phishing that can happen and how to combat that through, their own reflexibilities and seeing and understanding what that kind of material might look like in an email, all the way up to knowing how to present it to their security staffs to have it looked at, researched, and blocked.
Yeah. So that's interesting though. So after you go through a training period, it seems like even in the introduction of that training, seems like after only about 2 or 3 months, we can see a significant reduction in risk
Yeah,
to the organization as well.
and that's, Robert. That's pretty much an industry baseline standard. It's that, you know even ourselves at GDS, we when we first bought into this level of training and organization of training for ourselves, I mean, we were pretty fish prone. And then within 90 days, we saw a significant decrease, and we've seen a significant decrease every 90 days since, every quarter. Getting down to a point where you've trained the staff and the employees so well that you actually have to increase the difficulty of some of these trainings and fish tests to kind of get past them. But the good thing about that is it keeps them on their toes, and they're always hyper
Mhm.
aware of how to handle it.
Yeah, I would kind of look at it this way too. As we reduce the risk for an organization, we improve our posture, help prevent attacks, help us recover from those attacks. But also, when we go to our cyber insurance carriers, we can demonstrate, that we've gone through the due diligence, so we can get some more favorable cyber insurance policy ratings as well too. So that
Absolutely.
actually kind of takes, that kind of takes us to how about the culture of an organization, right? Now that we've gone past, training the users, what are the general thoughts on how does the organization as a whole, how does their culture change? What are they looking for? Because I look at it this way: a cyber attack has the same negative business outcomes as some sort of natural disaster, hurricanes and, flooding, or even, fires and so forth. So how do we equate a cyber attack to some of these other disasters?
Well, when you really think about it, the effect that a breach or a ransomware attack can have on a company has sent many of the same problems presented to the organization as man-made or natural disaster. I mean, you still have to consider, what are my mission critical systems and data, and have those cataloged and understand what it takes to really keep your business up and running or get it back up and running. You have to understand if you have a certain amount of redundancy built in case those things happen. You have to know about where your data is, and what is mission critical data and how it's protected, in what way is it encrypted at rest, is it encrypted in transit, you really have to prepare for that and look at it in the same way, like in the deep south in Louisiana, we look at how we would handle it if a hurricane, unfortunately, would demolish our data center or our business. So in many of the same ways that you can see the similarities that you're going to handle that situation this from a cyber breach standpoint in the same way you would a natural disaster, just to make sure that you're able to recover more quickly and get back into operations.
No, so that's a pretty good concept right there. So I think all this kind of plays into, do we have a framework to address, how do we deal with security? So when we take a look at it, the NIST cybersecurity framework, can you kind of walk us through this just a little bit? Kind of give us an idea of an example of how a cybersecurity framework can help an organization, kind of from beginning all the way through the end.
Well, I mean, and kind of going back to what I said before, in this case, essentially the first place you got to start is you have to identify what your risk is. You have to identify your structure and your business environment to know what to protect and why to protect it, right? The other thing is once you've identified those things, you need to have some awareness and training on the part of the company and the staff, the employees. You need to keep that up to date. You need to make sure that you at least annually update, and make sure that you have an accurate inventory of all those mission critical systems and data you have, and that you're training people in the right way to do that. You need to apply certain technologies to help protect that data and that connectivity from the internet, and also internal to the business. You need to isolate some of those servers and critical systems away from the average user, and really harden who can get into those things and make any change, right? You need to have the detection ability to see anomalies and to understand, what bad actors or what threat vectors are there, and what anomalies or events are occurring that might be something that you need to be concerned with, and continuously monitor those things so that you're always aware. And then you have to, once you know what you've got, right, and how to protect it, and you've detected a problem, you need to have a way to respond to that. You need to, if you have a true inventory of your mission critical data and systems, you have some protection systems and protocols in place, you've detected it, there's a good chance that you'll be able to respond in kind to whatever that threat is. And then once you've, mitigated that to some ability, and pushed it out of your environment or your infrastructure, then you can recover, right? You have to also know how to recover back those mission critical systems and data. And that takes a lot of planning, and you have to be able to communicate that across the organization. And in some cases, even with legal teams and HR and breach coaches, to get back in full operation.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So like we were talking about earlier, the normal things that you would address from a business resiliency, making sure that your resources are identified, they're protected, they're maintained. Take a look at having the ability to detect failures of any kind. In this case, it would be a security event. And then, of course, how do you respond to them and how to recover? Because, we all know, security is out there. Everybody's doing their best to defend against those attacks, but you can't have a false sense of security at this point. You have to take a look at knowing that you're going to get breached and make sure that you have a path for recovery. So we're going to talk about that one a little bit as well too. So I guess kind of with that in mind, let's talk about our poll question number 3. How confident are you confident in your incident response plan that you currently have in place? So I guess Tracey, a quick question. Why do some customers not have an incident response plan? What's the thoughts behind that?
Yeah, I would suggest, from what I've seen, it's usually because they have an overabundance of confidence in the security platforms that they have in place. Now, that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because they were sold, a philosophy of security that maybe doesn't fit their organization, a lack of knowledge on how to adequately harden an infrastructure in an organization. But more often than not, it's they've bought into a system or a set of systems that they believe fully and completely protects them from any type of incident, which is, we've seen over and over again. It's simply just not true. It's more a matter of if you get breached versus when, and we've seen that all the way up to the largest organizations and companies in the United States, and even large government organizations. So it's really important to understand that whether you think you do or not, the history and the data indicate that you need to prepare yourself with an incident response plan to be able to recover quickly and effectively and get back in business.
Okay, well, thanks. So some quick poll results here. 13% are very confident in their plan, so kudos to that group of users right there. 50% somewhat confident. Some next steps might be to test the incident response plan to increase that confidence. And about 38% don't have one in place. So those are some conversations that we can have, and take a look about how an incident response plan can help an organization. So when we take a look at the incident response plan, I'm sure it's going to cover quite a few activities. So what are some of the common elements that you would expect to see in an incident response plan, and why?
Well, what you definitely want to, again, ahead of time, when we go back to the NIST framework, you want to have followed that to some degree, obviously, and the more you have, the better. Because to have an effective incident response plan, you have to know what mission critical systems and data you have. You have to understand how you protected them, how you detected it, your response plan in that. Then when we get down into what we really want to worry about is how do we get back in business, right? So, you need to have an effective communication plan within your organization about the breach occurrence. You need to have steps in place on how to properly mitigate any breach activity that may have happened. Because what people really don't understand, especially when you definitely should bring in federal law enforcement. There's a lot of forensics data that can be pulled from these systems that have been breached, right? So an effective incident response plan needs to include the proper handling of that forensics data so that they can track down who done this to you, right? Reporting on that the entire time, an accurate accounting of what happened from the first minute that you realized you were breached all the way out to the recovery and of your backed up systems is crucial, because your insurance company is going to want to be heavily involved in understanding how you handled that or had a third party handle that for you. And one of the other critical things that I don't think a lot of people take into account, and we all kind of forget that we need to do, is you need to run those as a tabletop exercise at least annually. You need to simulate a breach of your organization, just to make sure that everybody understands what their role is to play in that and how to effectively get back in business.
So this kind of wraps around to the conversation we had just a little bit earlier about the culture of an organization. Are they looking at their business survivability? Do the people know their roles? Have they been trained properly? And really identifying what to expect, how to respond to an event. Because I'm thinking, if you're trying to respond to an event and you don't have a roadmap out in front of you, that's probably the worst time to start thinking about it. Probably panic ensues. You're losing the forensics. There's probably some significant risk on how do you even respond at that point.
Yeah, it's very difficult to kind of build the plane and fly it at the same time, as they say.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So when we kind of take a look at it, we know that there's a lot of products that are, coming out in the market, right? You mentioned earlier, the confidence that people are having the products that they've selected along the way, and that might be why they think they're so well protected. They don't have that incident response plan, just baked out yet. But one of the things that we're seeing is, there's a lot of security products, right? Probably in the past, 5+ years or so, you see an explosion of vendors with new security products along the way. It can protect a lot of different attack vectors, but one of the things that we tend to see at this point is they don't really interoperate well together, right? So you might have something that's protecting, maybe a firewall or maybe an endpoint or maybe email and stuff like that. But when you want to try to, I guess cover the entire organization, you need to take a look at protecting all of the different attack vectors and basically putting together on a, say a common, pane of glass, a common view. So one of the things that we want to talk about as we go through this is how do we stack all of these solutions together, right? So, we started off talking about, the end user education. I think that's going to be foundational. It's going to go across the board. If you can't do anything else, I'd say today, let's start educating our users so they become more aware of threats. As Tracey was mentioning earlier, take a look at an email and say, okay, hey, is this a legitimate email or is this someone, that's, phishing for information? And then once you tune your users to start looking for things like this, they can quickly detect and avoid some of these missteps that are along the way. So, end user education, I think is absolutely critical. And then you have your next layer, which is going to be your solution set. So Tracey, can you kind of walk us through a little bit of a solution set and how they interoperate with each other?
Yeah, for sure. We keep talking about email over and over again because it is primarily the most used attack vector from bad actors. So it's critical to have a layered approach, to start out with some type of email security device, right? Something that can look at the email coming and going, and you can feel confident that it's catching those, to the best of its ability, at least, those emails that are phishing attempts or contain malware, right? The next thing you need to be worried about is your malware protection on your endpoints. You need to have a system there that is tied back to an ecosystem of platforms and security knowledge that it can adapt and see malware as it presents itself out in the wild. It can catch it before it does too much damage or any damage at all in most cases to your computers, your desktops, your servers, things like that. You obviously need to have a really great firewall. You need to have one that has a layered approach in the way it handles that, from application blocking to network IP traffic blocking, and properly configured so that it's prepared to protect your environment from the outside world. When we talk about DNS, that's more about your browsing abilities, right? So what you definitely don't want are your users being able to go out and go to some of these millions of malicious websites and accidentally picking up, some form of a Trojan or a bot or a malware of some kind, right? So you definitely need to have some DNS protection out there, protecting, I guess you'd call it the outer domain of your user access into the internet. And then, one of the bigger things too that people need to think a lot about is policies and access, right? So, especially in the world that we live in today, where there's a lot of roaming clients, you need to establish these policies and policies of access so that even if somebody's outside of the domain of the building that they normally work in, if they're at home or abroad, you need to have security policies baked into that whole platform, that whole ecosystem of security that protect people no matter where they are.
That's pretty interesting there. So I always looked at it this way, IT systems are an implementer of policy, not a creation of policy.
Correct.
So having those policies, having that access, that can turn around and be implemented in those systems, and that actually goes into that whole building out of the framework. The other thing I kind of picked up quickly out of this, I look at the DNS protection as more preventative, where the other solutions are more of detection and response kind of pieces. So you can see there's some maturity in this whole level right there, so you can have some defense in depth. And of course, you can take that information and send it into your management systems. Can you kind of run us through those a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So when we talk about SIEM, or security incident and event management, what we're really talking about there is a platform that takes in all of the data or the log events that happen throughout an enterprise, right? So, and all the layer above that, you see the various security platforms that we need to utilize to protect ourselves and prevent and harden. Well, what a SIM will do is take in the logs that are created across all those platforms, including, your servers and your endpoints, and bring that into one centralized place where, security analysts and engineers can then tune that to get rid of all the noise, we call it, the false positives, and really be able to drill in, get the content or the data out of it that's really critical and really concerns us from a security standpoint, right? So what do we do with that? Now we have that. Now we've got to have people to handle it, to resolve those issues that have come from the SIM, right? So that's where the SOAR comes in, and it's a security orchestration, automation, and response platform. Effectively, what a SOAR does is allows engineers and security analysts to build playbooks on how to handle the various attacks that come in, the various forms of malware and Trojans and bots, and look across the ecosystem or the cyberspace battlefield and understand what's coming in, how are we being attacked, and now how can we respond to that in kind. So what it effectively does is it allows an already overworked security workforce to automate many of the things that they need to do daily, because as we all understand, no company could ever afford to have the army of analysts and engineers it would take to block the countless amount of security problems and constant threats that we face. So between the SIM and the SOAR, it gives the analyst and the engineer a huge set of tools to more proactively handle these security threats that we encounter daily.
So it sounds like the SOAR is probably one of the major areas where we implementing our incident response plan. So that's kind of cool. And as far as the event management, if we're logging all this information, I suspect that's also helpful when it comes to audit time. If you have a HIPAA compliance or a PCI compliance or SOX compliant, if you have this information, it helps you, go through your audit so you can, present to your auditors really what's going on in your environment.
Yeah, and let me add to that because that's something I missed. Yeah, definitely so, especially for those organizations that have to meet certain compliance standards, right? In every case, auditors are wanting to have you need to have some form of log management so that you can go back and talk about how you're managing your data, right? So the SIM is another great tool to do that, and the SOAR along with it. There's actually playbooks that can be created that will help people stay within the compliance standards that they have to meet.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting, and we help customers with that quite a bit. Going through their audit cycles as well. So kind of switching gears just a little bit, kind of do a deeper dive into some of the solutions. So we're talking about our attack vectors, right? So in this particular case, let's talk about, the network or the remote office as kind of one of an attack vector. We have users who are kind of, working remote. A lot of them are working from home. So I think that kind of expanded the security vector, the landscape right there. Let's talk about how do we protect, those remote users?
Well, I mean, you really need to have the same kind of protection available to those remote users as you do in your office, right? Which really starts with advanced malware protection. They need to be able to have the clients on those machines that connect back to the cloud in order for them to be protected wherever they go real time. So if you have the same endpoint protection or advanced malware protection and content related filtering that you do available to them wherever they go, you can always feel pretty confident that they're going to be secure in whatever environment they're connecting into.
Okay, so when we kind of get beyond that, we could have some that the continuation of that mobile workforce. What other technologies can we imply to standardize that security posture across the entire organization?
Well, I mean, one of the other things we can talk about is web content filtering, like you discussed earlier with under DNS. Again, that, like you said, that's more of a preventative measure that is applied to remote workers, so that again, wherever they're at, they have this set of policy-driven access to the internet baked into the web content filtering, so that they can't even accidentally go off into an area that might attract malware or bad actors onto them. And between the endpoint protection, the advanced malware protection, and the web content filtering talking with each other, they can identify these these threatening file hashes or malicious domains or forms of malware delivery better than they ever could before.
So it sounds like as we're building this ecosystem of products, the same products that we have protecting the users when they're within the office space, we leverage that same solution set when they're outside of the office. So no change of behavior for the end users. Your security staff still gets to use those same product sets. They didn't have to switch tools just because the user is now working at a different location. So a lot of efficiencies that can be brought to scale there. Now, when we also take a look at it, we have one of the other attack vectors is email. I kind of look at it, a lot of people see it from an inbound, but also want to talk about the outbound. So we have these users, they're located everywhere, but they do have still a centralized email pathway. Let's kind of talk about how do we protect email, both inbound and outbound.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, like you just said, everybody seems to focus on email security and meaning bad email coming in, right? Which, an effective email security posture and platform, again, will be tied back into many of these solutions we've talked about so that they all perform equally in almost near real time to protect the end user. But in terms of, having the access to the same threat intelligence that many other organizations tied into the cloud do as well. But one of the other things that people need to really focus on is outbound emails, because unfortunately, if somebody, if a company were to be quote unquote spamming from their environment out into the web or other users, it can be very detrimental. If it happens too often or too long, those companies' domains can be blacklisted, and it takes some time to kind of get your reputation back from something like that. So you really want an email system that protects your communication both coming in and protects your your email going out, to make sure that you don't have some problem and in some way lose your reputation.
Right. So that reputation seems to be pretty important. So your reputation on the internet can affect your business, right? So if your system is sending out spam mail and you get blacklisted, any business function that is dependent upon that email is going to shut down. Electronic ordering, for example, business communications, all that kind of gets shut down. I think we also can do a couple of additional things here. Let's talk about data loss prevention. How do we make sure that data that does not leave the organization, that should not leave the organization?
Well, one of the ways that we talk about that is we do a lot of cross-vector analysis of what's happening, where our data is moving throughout the infrastructure and through our ecosystem. We need to have visibility into all that traffic and where it's going, both internal and external. And if we can understand if we can monitor that traffic and have connectivity to all of our endpoints and to all of our inbound and ingress and egress internet traffic, we can keep a handle on where that data goes and who deserves to get that data or who has the rights to get that data.
Yeah, good. And then, of course, for certain organizations that have a high degree of sensitivity, we need to encrypt that email as it's going out to make sure prying eyes don't get a peek at it as it's traversing the internet. So when we kind of take a look at putting all of those together, we talked about the network, we talked about the endpoints, we talked about email. Let's tie the whole thing together. Let's talk about how do we bring these individual solutions together to have an overarching, security, we'll call it protection there.
Yeah, and I kind of touched on the previous question, but really what you need to have the full battle space picture of your infrastructure and your connectivity and your data, right? So what you need are the ability to look out across all your various connectivity options, VSAT, LTE, broadband. You need to look at, where your network data centers are located, your data centers are, and then your endpoints, and kind of tie that all together so that you have a full picture of the battle space and be able to analyze all the data moving throughout that, and understand where this data is moving to and where it's coming from and where it's going to. Because as soon as you can master that, as soon as you can have a full picture of that battle space, you can be a whole lot more secure in how you harden that to prevent it from being leaked out into the world or being breached internally.
Right. So it's a pretty interesting concept. So we've heard the term day zero attacks. So if we kind of go through an orchestration of an attack, let's say a day zero attack, something came in through email, and since it was not a known vulnerability, it might have made it down to an endpoint. So it seems like as we're doing, the file trajectory analysis, when we do discover that's an event that occurred, we can now take a look at every other location where that malware has landed and eradicate it there. And we can also take a look at, how do we feed that information back into the big picture, right? How do we make sure that all the other attack vector protection systems take advantage of that? So how does, leveraging the cloud help us in that regard?
Well, I mean, what you just said is 100% correct. What you want to be able to have is, we talked about earlier, your advanced malware protection on your endpoints. You want to have, the ability to manage your DNS traffic coming and going. You're going to have a firewall in place that is also tied to the cloud, as well as your email security device. So if all of those, 4 layers are tied back into the cloud, effectively what's happening there is they're able to communicate with each other, and to a greater extent, organizations outside of your company that may see these same activities in a cloud environment. What they're able to do is immediately, as soon as it's understood that there is a 0-day activity being performed or a malware of some kind in your environment, they're able to talk to each other. And so, for instance, if it came in through an email and it's discovered there that it's a bad activity or malicious, your email device is able to then talk to your firewall and maybe block some IP traffic for if it's trying to talk out to the internet. It's also able to talk to your advanced malware protection so that it can look out across all your other endpoints and stop it in its tracks there. It can also go over and look at your DNS traffic and your web traffic and say, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. That 0-day is beaconing or trying to talk outside of our network and receive more information or more orders on how to expand itself laterally in the network. It can stop it there and block that DNS traffic. So it's super critical that there is in fact a layered approach, right? And it's all talking to each other through that cloud ability, because it's you're not just at that point when you're talking in an ecosystem that's built into many other organizations across the United States or even the world. You have the advantage of catching that you're getting their threat intelligence in your platform almost real time. So it's super critical for all those things to talk through the cloud and be able to posture yourself correctly in that way.
That's very interesting, because when you take a look at, the attacks that are out there, it's more than any individual or team can actually handle. So you need to have that intelligence, that machine learning, the artificial intelligence built into your system to be able to respond, to your point earlier, in real time to those events. And of course, now when we take a look at it, that the systems have identified that, then that's where we go back into the SOAR, right? How do we take that information, that covers the entire attack surface, and how do we bring that over to our SOAR? Let's kind of talk about that one for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of alluded to earlier, to be perfectly honest with you, there are not enough security personnel in existence to be able to address all the threats that's happening right now. I think last time I read, I think we're shy somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 qualified security experts in the United States. So the biggest hurdle we face on a day-to-day basis is the sheer volume of attacks and malicious activity we see coming through, right? And so the only way that you can counteract that is with human beings be able to interact with machine learning and AI to build these playbooks, to take in that data from the SIM and work with the SOAR to automate many, if not all, of these processes, so that one individual, for instance, can turn into 10 individuals using a SOAR. So when you talk about frontline analysts, security analysts, and things like that, hypothetically, if there was 30 events that were happening a day, to be effective at all, you would have to have at least half that number of analysts to get those off the board and feel protected or get them resolved. With SIM and SOAR and that orchestration and the machine learning and the AI, you can build in many of these playbooks to automate how those things are handled well in advance of even the technician touching the ticket or the engineer. And by the time they see it, it's just a decision made by a human being to go, okay, I agree with that. No new threat hunting is involved, and you can close out that and call it a resolved problem.
Gotcha. Well, you just mentioned the number of people, but you also kind of think about it, that's around the clock, because
Right.
security is, 24/7, 365 environment. Just because we're sleeping at night doesn't mean the attackers are sleeping as well too. We can be attacked there as well too. And then you also have to think about some, other defense in depth. We talked about the network protection a little bit earlier. One of the things that come into mind, you're talking about determining your inventory, your assets, and their business requirements and resiliency and stuff. I think back to one of the breaches from a few years ago. It was a credit card breach, but it was not a breach on the point of sale systems. The original breach was on the HVAC systems, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning controls. It was a low priority system that had low security, and that's where the attackers went. And they got into that one, and then eventually worked their way to the point of sale system where they harvested millions of credit cards. So this goes back to our comment earlier about the time between breach and actual detection. So during that, say 200 plus days, that's what the bad actors are doing. They're surveilling the environment, trying to figure out what's beneficial. Where's their what can they attack to it that they can monetize. So it's a business. It really is a business. There's software developers that are out there that are writing malware, and they're even providing service level agreements to their customers who are buying their malware software for distribution. And if their systems now get blocked by these security measures, these coders are rewriting their code to overcome those. So it's a constant environment, and even some of that software is polymorphic. It'll change by itself over time to avoid detection as well too. So it is definitely an ecosystem and a business ecosystem that we're up against at this point.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, Robert. That's why it's so super critical that you continue to look at cybersecurity in your organization as a layered approach, right? Because you really need to have the ability to reach out and view and monitor really every corner, of your infrastructure. You need to have the malware protection. You need to have DNS coverage, advanced DNS security. You need to have email protection in place. You need to have a great firewall, and ultimately, you need to be able to bring all that back to a SIM/SOAR environment, because, like you just said, with the way that these things change, and the polymorphing code and things like that, the good thing about the orchestration piece of this is that you can build in with machine learning and AI something that's called, it pretty much is looking at patterns of human activity, right? So if you have the full coverage across the enterprise and you build in the right playbooks, maybe it is a 0-day virus that has happened. But for instance, in the case you talk about this company being breached from their HVAC systems, if they had some kind of AI in place or orchestration in place to look at human patterns, maybe they would have found out that this user normally doesn't clock in or check in or activate an account at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and you've seen it happen multiple times over a week. You can draw attention to that and understand it better. So the more coverage you have, the more orchestration you have through log management and the SOAR, the better off you are.
Yeah. So look, it's, you can see there's a security maturity level concept that's going to come into play here. An organization will have to keep incrementally improving their security postures.
Absolutely.
Basically taking a playbook and, getting on the practice field and learning it to where it becomes muscle memory. So good stuff there. So kind of wrapping up here just a little bit, kind of want to go through a couple of high points about what we've discussed, and right before we get into any kind of Q&A that's out there. So one of the first things that I really like to promote is the education of the users. I think that is paramount, right? The education of the users. I was talking to some techie guys and people who are familiar with OSI layer. There's 7 layers of technology and stuff, and they started calling the human element of it the 8th layer, right? You can deploy a lot of security components that are out there, but if a user still clicks on something that they should not have clicked on, you can get infected. Now, at least at this point, you have a way to detect and recover, remediate and recover, but let's try to take a look at educating the users, changing that behavior, kind of focusing on bringing in that security culture into the organization to even avoid those. And of course, we talked about that whole defense in depth. Take a look at your organization. Take a look at where the potential attack vectors. Everybody has an email system. Everybody has end users with laptops, tablets, smartphones, and so forth. We got to take a look at how they're utilizing, those systems and how can we protect those systems, whether they're inside the network or maybe working at home. So kind of a network all the way out there. So we want to make sure that, whether we're talking about the network, we're talking about the email, we're talking about the end users themselves, those are all different attack vectors that we all need to protect all of those. But we also want them, to work well together as well too. And here, this is critically important. All right, what to do when a breach occurs. It's not if, really. It's when. At some point, you're going to get breached. You may have already been breached. How is it? One of the things people said, there's two types of security customers out in the world: those who have been breached, and those who don't know that they've been breached. So, it's kind of a little bit out there, tongue in cheek, but it's really bringing in awareness. If you can understand what's going on in your environment, if you have a good inventory, you know what's going on. To Tracey's point earlier, if you understand the behavior, what is the baseline? And when you have deviations from the baseline, then at that point you can start to say, okay, this is an indication of a compromise. And then your security team, through your SIM and your SOAR and your technical talent, can take a look at that information and say, okay, how can we analyze this, identify it, and then of course at that point you want to be able to quarantine, respond, remediate, and then recover. And that recovery piece, you kind of have to make sure that you're closing the loop, right? What are the lessons learned? What event occurred? How did it impact us? How did we respond? And let's feed that back into the process so we have, constant, improvement overall in the security arena there. So that was kind of our messaging today. Make sure you protect your network, make sure you educate your users, and make sure you have a plan for when you get breached. So those are three critical things that kind of wanted to talk about today. So I want to open up the floor for any type of Q&A that's out there. I think we probably have about 2 to 3 more minutes. So if there's any questions that are out there, please feel free to put them in your in the Q&A panel there. Let's see, I've got one question. Can employee education solutions be customized to my workforce? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So think about the solution you're going to use for education. So there's going to be a couple of points to it. So one of them is about educating the users, right? And that's through video, and you have to make sure that that video is consumable, right? If you're putting in, 30, 45-minute sessions, people, you get past an hour, they're really not going to engage with those. So you need to make those sessions engaging and relevant to your users and to get into it. Now there's a reinforcement portion as you go through some, question and so forth, as part of the training video, but you also have the ability to do what Tracey was talking about earlier, a phishing campaign from that same platform. So let's say you educated, your users around business email compromise, how to detect emails from an outside source that was trying to solicit money from your organization. Then you can come behind with a phishing campaign, sending the email to your users to see if did they put into effect what they were had seen through the training. Now, because of that overall platform, the ability to present data and be able to test, you can use this to customize training for your workforce for other areas beyond just security. You might have an HR onboarding training video. We've been talking about security, but you also can take a look at, can we bring in safety training videos in this as well too? So it's a learning management system that you can utilize beyond just the security, and you can schedule your events for your training for your people. You can test to see if they absorb the knowledge, and at the end, you'll actually have the data to support any type of audits, whether it's a security audit, have you trained your people? Maybe it's a safety audit, have you trained your people in, workplace safety and some things along those lines. So it certainly can be customizable to meet your needs. So there's no other questions. I'm going to go ahead and just drop in our contact slide. If you have any questions, you certainly reach out to Global Data Systems. You can on our website. You can see us on a large number of the social media platforms, just reach us at our corporate office or one of our remote branch offices, and we're actually here to help. So again, we thank you for your time today. Again, as we mentioned, this session was recorded, so probably in about 2 or 3 days, you'll see this information going out to you for all the attendees. Again, if you have any questions, certainly feel free to to reach out to us. We're here to help. You can reach us at 888-435-7986. You can get to our sales group right there. If you already have an account manager, reach out to your account manager. We'd love to sit down with you, take a look at where you are in your security roadmap. Are you at the very beginning stage needing to do some assessments? Or are you kind of toward the end where, hey, I need to mature my incident response plan? So just kind of let us know, and we're here to help out. Also, for the attendees today, we actually have a 50% off on our network protection assessment. If you haven't done one before, this might be a good place to assess really what's in your environment. So what do you have to protect? Going back to Tracey's statement earlier, you can't protect what you don't know is there. So a lot of times the first step is to do a network protection assessment. So with that being said, I certainly appreciate you guys joining us today, and thank you, and you guys have a great day.